I'm Diane Neubauer. I'm going to share two teaching strategies that for me developed more recently out of my education classes that I'm teaching now, but I have some ideas for how to apply them in a language classroom that I wanted to share. So I'm going to share both the kind of same language content area instructional strategy version, and then I'll talk about maybe a new language, developing language for the students and modifications for that. So I'm interested to see if language teachers would find this useful. I think I would use it in year 3, 4 for sure, maybe with more scaffolding earlier. So the first of these two strategies I've called Jigsaw Read and Report. The idea is that every student has read something and then they're going to report back on what they read. But I structure it a little bit more. So let me get myself out of the way. This is an example. Everyone read part of this article. We all read the introduction and then the conclusion. So that put us kind of on the same page. We knew sort of what was going on. And then half the class read one section, the other half read a different section. So several students read this, several students read this, all students read the beginning and the conclusion. So in class, after having read this each section on their own time, and I'll talk about an adaptation for language classrooms without homework in a moment, but the idea was these groups would first meet who had read the same section, and they would talk through things like, well, what were the big ideas here? Are there terms that we need to define? Are there any points of confusion anyone had from the article? Was it easy enough to read? So they talked through that, and I had a little infographic, kind of an organizer, where they could do that. Here's my idea for the modification for a language classroom. Let's say in class, everyone has read something on this same topic, but now you have two parallel or very similar readings, and each group is assigned to read one. And then they're going to do this jigsaw read and report with their classmates who read the other. And perhaps in this time, where they're spending this time to meet with the group that read the same section they did, you would have students meet with each other if they read the same story, and they would maybe pick 6 sentences that kind of retold that story in short form if they needed more scaffolding. If they needed a little less scaffolding, it could be that they wrote a short summary of the story that they read. So it depends, they could go as basic as pick out a few sentences that they could then read aloud, so they didn't have to be super productive with their speaking. Or if they're more proficient in the language, they could create the sentences. I would say in this case, you'd want them to write them down or type them or take notes on them in some way. When I was doing this in teacher ed, this section had an infographic, and they worked on filling that out together beforehand. And things like, what are the big ideas here in bullet point form? What are some terms that you need to know? In this case, in a language classroom, maybe it's, here's a couple of new vocabulary items that came up. You want to watch out for this. This means that. So you could do that sort of approach, or you could just do that kind of, I used to call it pick 6, where you'd read a chapter of a book and pick 6 sentences that pretty well summarize it, and then we could do something with those 6 sentences again. So step 1, they read something. You could have them read this in class if it's a language classroom, so that you're not assigning homework in K-12. At the university level, it's expected to have homework on their own time. They've done that reading, and then they come back, meet, regroup, figure out what's going on in that section. So I love that because they're kind of co-constructing their understanding by talking through with their classmates. And then once this seems like they're kind of settled, they're kind of ready, 10, 15 minutes approximately, I would have them mix up the groups. So this time, maybe a group of between 4 and 6 students seem to work better. So it's not necessarily that the whole big, huge group that read one piece meets now half and half meet, and it's still a huge group meeting to talk in the second section. You could have smaller groups and multiple groups. So as long as every group has at least 2 people that read the same thing, so they've got somebody to back them up, so they've got some help and support. As long as there's at least 2 people that read the same thing with at least 2 people who read the other thing. That's what worked. So here in the teacher education context, they're describing using this read and report form, that infographic kind of note taker piece of paper that I gave them. They would describe and take notes. The other students should ask questions and get more details, check your understanding. So when they said this and that, did it relate to this? Like that kind of thing. And then they would choose a final task, which I'll show in just a moment. So now adapted to a language classroom, I could see this being that time where they either, depending on the level of scaffolding that they need, depending on their proficiency, you could have students reporting their 6-sentence summary to the other group. And where I would do an infographic kind of a thing is a Venn diagram. So if you've got two stories or two descriptive pieces that are similar, I'm going to go big screen to show this. So, oh, got a glare. So I would have like, let's say this is group 1's and then this is group 2's. Oh, made not to scale. And then like as group 2 is hearing from group 1, they're reading their sentences that they've decided on to be the summary of the story or the piece that they read. Group 2 is listening for what might be in common with theirs. And they would take some notes here if it's points that are in common. If they're hearing some things that are new or different from their piece, they would take notes here. So this is like the little accountability piece, but it's also helping them keep track of the ideas. So as group 2 is listening to group 1 report out, they would be taking these notes. And then they'll switch. So group 2 is going to report on what they read, and group 1 is listening for the things that are in common and for anything that is different about the other group's story or reading, descriptive reading. I could see like short passages that are about 2 different festival days or 2 different regions and describing some aspect about that region. I could see 2 stories and one, they both relate to some of the same vocabulary or theme, but they're different details. Anything that's got similar reading, but there's a little difference would work for this, I think. I haven't had the opportunity to do this with an actual language class, which is why I'm sharing it here, because I'd love to know if it works. I could see it really working with some students. So at the end of this time, then they're going to talk through what did you have in the middle in the language classroom setting. And I guess that could work even with the teacher ed, but in this case, they were going to take notes and they didn't really make that kind of a comparison, what was the same. But this is the way I would approach it in a language class. So in our case, then, we did a final task of their choice. And sometimes, so in the language classroom, sometimes, or in the teacher ed classroom, sometimes I ran out of time for this. So that was okay. But the idea was that they were going to have a choice of different share outs. So like, do you want to make it like you were doing an Instagram post? What image would you use? What wording would you use to describe what you learned from both sections? So now they've heard from their own group and from the group that read the other section, and they're going to put it all together and make a final summary kind of a task. So they could do an Instagram style thing, pretend they're going to make a TikTok video. Where would you take place? What kinds of imagery would you use? Would you use music in the background? What are your catchphrasey kinds of things that will help you communicate this? And then the one that they usually have chosen has been the less creative, maybe, in some ways, but maybe more practical in others. Write a short paragraph for someone about the thing that you learned. So thinking in terms of an administrator who may not know about language teaching, a parent, maybe your own students. So they would write that kind of a summary. So some sort of a summary piece. In the language classroom, I would say it would be this kind of a thing. So here's your summary. Come up with a list of what's the same and different about story 1 and story 2, or along those lines. So that's Jigsaw Read and Report. Tell me if you try it. Second strategy is, I've called it volleyball. Let's see. Oh, I know why it's not showing up. I'm in the way. Ah, that's not the one I want. This is it. So in this case, again, this is, you don't have to pay attention to the names of the authors here. It's just we had two readings that were on very similar content. One had a very similar set of details of teaching strategies in this case. And some of them read one piece and some read the other piece. And then to have them compare and contrast, I wanted them to get together in what I decided to call volleyball discussion. So the way we did this, the students in the class came up with a good tweak on what's written here. So I'll describe it for teacher ed. I'll then describe how I think it could apply in a language classroom setting. So how do you play? I had, again, two groups. Group one begins by choosing one of the strategies, one of the points from the reading that they had. And then they talk briefly about it, describe its main ideas. A couple or three students from group one share on that particular point. And then group two is listening. They might be noting some details, even writing down things. And then it goes over to group two, and they follow up by adding any points from their reading related to the same topic. So since these were all about different kinds of teaching strategies for helping English language learners get content area learning better, understanding language better, and learning better, more effectively, and being assessed more equitably and effectively, in this case, it really worked nicely. So what my students added to this, like before we played, so to speak, group one and group two met by themselves. So we did that kind of Jigsaw read and report group meeting. They called it, I want to say, like a team meeting first. And so they could pick one of the strategies and kind of feel that they were on the same page about it, and maybe even decide who might share first from their group. So they liked having that team meeting, and I saw that was really effective and helpful. So round one happened. Group one introduced their topic, shared about it. Group two listened. Group two responded, followed up with any contrasting or augmenting kinds of points from their reading. And group one listened to that. And then what was cool was there was a little bit of natural back and forth there where, oh, I remember this other thing from some reading we had before, or, oh, I've experienced that. Oh, I'm a student teacher next semester, and in the place where I've been observing, they said XYZ about this. So it was really nice. It was a little bit of a structure to the discussion, and the first couple steps were fairly structured, but different people could jump in after that and kind of go back and forth. And then group two's turn, they started with another point from what they had read, described that a bit with 2 to 3 students sharing different things about it. And group one was listening, noting details, noting and thinking through, how did our reading address that topic? And then they responded to it with any additional details, caveats, more info from their reading. And we did not get through all of the strategies in both readings, but we had such a rich discussion of it. I thought it was really, really nice. After this first round, they wanted another team meeting, but they didn't need it quite as much. So in that first team meeting, they might come up with a list like, oh, I really thought this, and this one were the most important from our article. Let's talk about those. Or I have the most to say about this one. Can I talk on that one? They could do all of that kind of work in that opening team meeting. And afterwards, I asked the students, what did you think about it? And they liked it. I think overall, I didn't see unhappy people, and some were really positive about it. I asked if they needed those team meetings after each round, and they felt that maybe not. And after they had gotten used to doing this kind of volleyball discussion of 2 different readings, they might not even need that team meeting at the beginning because they would kind of be able to feel the flow of talking with each other. Now, language classroom, how would this work? I think it could work like this. So you've got, again, 2 groups have read 2 different readings that are similar or parallel stories, or both are things about the same news event, something like that. Different groups are reading different things. And so group one is going to share out either reading a sentence from their article or their story, or they've come up with a sentence about one aspect of the story. So again, based on their proficiency, are they choosing a piece of the reading to just read right off the page? Group two is going to listen and think, okay, they might need a little team meeting time again, like what, okay, they said this, which one is this? And so they would respond with a sentence either picked from their reading or something that they could, if they have the proficiency for it, to come up with right there on the fly. And so they're doing that same kind of group comparison of a reading back and forth, back and forth. So I'm curious to see what you think. And if any of you who are teaching, probably levels 2 and up, if this seems like one or both of those strategies might work, I'd love to hear if you try it.